nombre del Consejo Directivo de la Universidad del Valle de Guatemala, doy la más cordial bienvenida a todos los asistentes a este acto de lanzamiento de las nuevas carreras en el área de biotecnología y otorgamiento de doctorado honoris causa. Extiendo un saludo muy cordial a la doctora Ada Yonath, al excelentísimo embajador de Israel, señor Moshe Bashar, a los miembros del cuerpo diplomático, representantes de los medios de comunicación, a los miembros de la Fundación, miembros del Consejo Directivo y del Consejo Académico, directores de departamento y de centros de investigación, profesores e investigadores, estudiantes y amigos que nos honran con su presencia. En este momento harán su ingreso al estrado el señor rector, la presidenta y la secretaria ejecutiva de la Fundación de la Universidad y los miembros de los consejos directivos, los miembros del Consejo Directivo y la doctora Ada Yonath. Les solicito recibirles de pie. El primer punto del programa es la interpretación de nuestro himno nacional. Saludo 1. Pueden sentarse. Me permito presentar a las autoridades que acompañan al licenciado Roberto Moreno Godoy, rector de la universidad, en las mesas directivas. La licenciada Sofía Papagiu, presidente de la Fundación de la Universidad del Valle. La licenciada Cintia del Águila, secretaria ejecutiva de la Fundación de la Universidad del Valle de Guatemala. La doctora Ada Jonás, quien recibirá un doctorado honoris causa. La licenciada María Luisa Durando de Bem, vicerrectora académica. La licenciada Eugenia Rosales, secretaria del Consejo Directivo. El ingeniero Luis Fernando Andrade, vicerrector administrativo. La doctora Yolanda Toledo de Leal, vocal asesora del Consejo Directivo. La doctora Mónica Stein, vocal asesora y decana del Instituto de Investigaciones. El licenciado Fernando Pais, vocal asesor del Consejo Directivo y decano de la Facultad de Ingeniería. El doctor Adrián Gil, vocal asesor y decano de la Facultad de Ciencias y Humanidades. La licenciada Jacqueline García de León, codirectora de estudios. Y la maestra Lucía Nick, directora del Departamento de Bioquímica y Microbiología. El señor rector de la universidad, licenciado Roberto Moreno, dará las palabras de bienvenida. Ruego al rector pasar al podio.
Estimada doctora Ada Jonás, estimados miembros del Consejo Directivo y del Consejo Académico de la Universidad, estimados miembros de la Fundación de la Universidad del Valle de Guatemala, señor embajador de Israel, señor cónsul de Israel, invitados especiales, tengan todos muy buena tarde. Hoy es un día singular para nuestra casa de estudios. En los últimos días hemos sido afortunados de contar con la presencia de una mujer notable, la Premio Nobel de Química 2009, que acompaña a los miembros de la comunidad de nuestra casa de estudios con ocasión de la celebración de los 50 años de vida de la Universidad del Valle y particularmente en un esfuerzo muy grande que venimos realizando desde hace algún tiempo y que comenzó con el programa de bioquímica y microbiología de la universidad y que en los años venideros vendrá a complementarse con el tema de biotecnología molecular, biotecnología industrial y bioinformática. Todo eso hace que sea necesario que contemos más que nunca con la experiencia y el aporte de aquellos expertos y aquellos países que nos llevan la delantera en el campo. Para la Universidad del Valle, contar con la doctora Jonás ha sido una experiencia única en los últimos días. Yo le pedí a ella que me disculpara por dirigirme primero a la audiencia en español y darle la bienvenida en español a todos ustedes. Y al final me voy a dirigir especialmente a ella por la relevancia de este evento que celebramos el día de hoy. La universidad ha sido pionera en muchos campos en el país desde su constitución en 1966, cuando nadie pensaba en la formación de químicos, físicos, matemáticos y biólogos. Los fundadores de la universidad pensaron que ese campo era el que necesitaba el país para su desarrollo. De la misma manera, estábamos en un proceso inminente de reforma educativa en donde los profesores de segunda enseñanza aún se formaban de manera empírica y fue la Universidad del Valle la que abrió sus primeros programas de formación de maestros de secundaria en todas las disciplinas. Más adelante seguirían en ese mismo espíritu pionero los programas de educación especial y de problemas de aprendizaje para atender a todos los niños y jóvenes del país que tienen necesidades educativas especiales. Seguiría también el programa de inglés y seríamos también pioneros en muchos otros campos que van desde la enseñanza de la música, que ya tiene 25 años de vida en la universidad, hasta los programas de ingeniería en las distintas disciplinas. Hemos sido pioneros también en el campo de la investigación Y todo eso hace que nos renovemos constantemente, y en este último ciclo es el tema de bioquímica y biotecnología, el que entre otros tendrá una luz que nos iluminará a todos en una nueva ronda de adecuación curricular dentro de la universidad, pero sobre todo en una nueva ronda de seguir incidiendo en el desarrollo de Guatemala a través de ciencia, tecnología y educación. Since Friday, we have been blessed with the presence of a special guest in Guatemala. Even though Ada Jonath has been in the country, this is the third time that she visits Guatemala. We already knew about her accomplishments in the field of chemistry and the kind of work that she has done not only in Israel, but in other countries of the world. But what we didn't know is that we were going to find an amazing human being plus an exceptional scientist. Ada has been a person that has accepted all the challenges that Lucia, who was mainly responsible for arranging Ada's visit to Guatemala, she has coped with a very dense agenda since Friday, and she hasn't refused any activity that we have asked and considered in the agenda. He has been very kind, taking all questions, being able to pose in all pictures, being able to answer all questions. And what I appreciate the most about what Ada has taught us during the past days is that every time she meets with a group of students, especially if they are young students, there's a special shine and brightness in the way she sees them and she addresses them, trying to make sure that the passion that she has for science and the immense curiosity that she has is something more contagious than the bacteria that she analyzes on a permanent basis. And the other thing is that besides the joy that she has for research, for science, and for education, every time she talks about her family, about Nurit, and about your daughter Nurit, that she's turning 20 today, she's just so joyful about the family ties that she has, and she appreciates that aspect of her life so much that the only thing that you can conclude is that we do not only have a very talented scientist, but we have a rounded human being, and that's why she has had so impact not only in her home country, but in all the other places she visits. She says that this is the third time in Guatemala, but that she's looking forward to many other trips to the country. And Nurit, she already mentioned that this is just the first time here, and you did go to some places, but you're still missing the rest. So we are very thankful, Ada. You're making an immense honor to Universidad del Valle. It is difficult in a country like Guatemala to try to contribute to the development of the country through science, technology, and education. And having your presence in the country dignifies what we do, and it honors Universidad del Valle, and it is just the kind of energy we need in a new cycle of the institutional life to keep moving forward and to keep insisting on the relevance of science to solve the various problems that we encounter in our society. I appreciate the work that everybody has done in making this possible, especially Lucia, but there are some other people, the Dean of Sciences, Adrián, Maria Luisa, and a full team of members of our community that worked very hard to make sure that you had a good time in Guatemala, and I hope that we managed to deliver that particular objective we have. Thank you so much for accepting our invitation and for being a symbol of the new era in Universidad del Valle and a symbol of the efforts that we are carrying out in biochemistry and biotechnology. Thank you so much.
Muchas gracias, señor rector. La licenciada Eugenia Rosales, secretaria general, leerá el punto resolutivo del Consejo Directivo que confiere el doctorado honoris causa.
Muy buenas tardes. Acta 11-2015 de la sesión celebrada el miércoles 18 de noviembre de 2015. Punto sexto. Distinciones académicas en el marco del 50 aniversario de la Universidad del Valle de Guatemala. La comisión permanente designada por el Consejo Directivo para el análisis y propuesta de distinciones académicas presentó la propuesta para el otorgamiento de doctorados honoris causa a distinguidas personalidades nacionales e internacionales que se han destacado por sus valiosos aportes a la ciencia, las humanidades, la tecnología y la educación. El otorgamiento de estas distinciones se hará en conmemoración del 50 aniversario de la Universidad del Valle de Guatemala y tiene además el objetivo de resaltar el impacto de la institución a través de sus egresados y líderes. En ese sentido, la Comisión Permanente presentó las candidaturas correspondientes a varios profesionales e investigadores. En tal virtud, el Consejo Directivo, en reconocimiento a la contribución de profesionales e investigadores propuestos, la trascendencia de sus aportes y a su connotada participación en el desarrollo nacional y del mundo, resolvió conceder el doctorado honoris causa, que constituye la máxima distinción académica otorgada por la Universidad del Valle de Guatemala, a la doctora Ana Ionat, Premio Nobel de Química 2009, por su contribución a comprender el mecanismo de reacción de la síntesis de proteínas y el diseño de nuevos antibióticos y teorías de evolución de la vida, entre otros. La distinción se conferirá en una ceremonia especial el 22 de febrero de 2016. La doctora Ada Ionat estudió BSc en Química y maestría en Bioquímica en la Universidad Hebrea de Jerusalén. Posteriormente, recibió el doctorado en Cristalografía de Rayos X en el Instituto Weizmann de Ciencias, Israel. Realizó estancias postdoctorales en el Instituto Carnegie Mellon en Pittsburgh y en el Instituto Tecnológico de Massachusetts en Estados Unidos. Actualmente es la directora del Centro Kimmelman de Estructura Biomolecular del Instituto Weizmann. La doctora Ionat fue galardonada con el Premio Nobel por sus trabajos pioneros sobre el ribosoma para lograr las primeras estructuras tridimensionales de la fábrica celular de proteínas, las cuales abrieron las puertas a múltiples investigaciones sobre el funcionamiento del ribosoma que están teniendo impacto en combatir la resistencia a antibióticos y por lo tanto en los servicios de salud, entre una amplia variedad de aplicaciones. Sus investigaciones han sido plasmadas en más de 200 publicaciones en revistas arbitradas. Es miembro activo de las siguientes academias: Nacional de Ciencias de Estados Unidos, Israelí de las Ciencias y Humanidades, Europea de Ciencias y Artes, Americana de Ciencias y Artes, Coreana de Ciencia y Tecnología, Internacional de Astronáutica e Internacional de Microbiología, además de la Organización Europea de Biología Molecular. Muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias, licenciada Rosales. A continuación, invito a la maestra Lucía Nig, directora del Departamento de Bioquímica y Microbiología, quien hará la semblanza de la doctora Jonás, por lo que le invito a pasar al podio.
Muchas gracias, Hilda. Antes de empezar, voy a saludar a la doctora en inglés. Thank you, Ada, for being here. And it had been a wonderful experience since day one. And all the preparatives have raised the spirits of the scientific community around. I have to say that I knew you were outstanding, but now it's just beyond that. And I really think that your life should be recorded in a movie or something like that, because it is quite inspiring. Once I said that, I will go in Spanish. La doctora Ada Jonat nació el 22 de junio de 1939 en lo que más tarde sería el Estado de Israel. Tiene un origen modesto y representa un ejemplo de cómo la pasión por aprender y la curiosidad pueden llevarnos lejos y permitirnos transformar vicisitudes en un producto positivo. A partir de los 12 años, después de la muerte de su papá, la doctora Jonat trabajó para contribuir al sustento de su mamá y de su hermana Nurit. Ella tuvo facilidad para las ciencias básicas desde su educación secundaria y conforme se fue involucrando más en la ciencia, dio tutorías de matemática y física a estudiantes de bachillerato. La doctora Ada nos ha hecho ver que cuando descubrió la ciencia y se apasionó por ella, vio que era un hobby. Sí, un hobby es la ciencia para ella, por el que le podrían pagar, por lo cual tendría un doble beneficio. ¿Qué más podía pedir? Así pues, estudió, esta parte ya la han escuchado de parte de Hilda, estudió un análogo a la licenciatura en química y una maestría en bioquímica en Israel, en una universidad pública, en la Universidad Hebrea, y posteriormente recibió el doctorado en cristalografía de rayos X. Cabe mencionar que para eso se requiere una fuerte base de matemática, física y química aplicadas en conjunto a moléculas de diferentes tamaños. Este doctorado lo hizo en el Instituto Weizmann de Ciencias de Israel, que fue una de las primeras 3 universidades con las que contó el Estado de Israel. Allí estudió la estructura de la proteína del colágeno, sí, esa proteína que se agrega ahora en las cremas. Realizó estancias postdoctorales en el Instituto Carnegie Mellon en Pittsburgh y en el MIT, en español Instituto Tecnológico de Massachusetts, en Estados Unidos. También trabajó en el Instituto Max Planck, un renombrado instituto de la Unión Europea. En estas casas académicas, donde siendo una joven científica y muy soñadora, interactuó con reconocidos científicos que la inspiraron a investigar estructuras aún más grandes que las proteínas. Ella escogió una pregunta, una de las preguntas más importantes de esa época: ¿cómo se producen las proteínas a partir del ARN? Debo mencionar que no se tenía mucha esperanza en que se pudiera lograr entender el mecanismo. El desafío era considerado imposible en esa época. Sin embargo, la doctora Jonat decidió resolver esta pregunta. Así pues, después de 20 años, gana el premio Nobel por sus trabajos pioneros sobre el ribosoma, como ustedes ya escucharon y ya lo saben, aplicando un agudo razonamiento para lograr las primeras estructuras tridimensionales de esta fábrica celular de proteínas que son los ribosomas. Utilizó la técnica de biocriocristalización. Tiene 3 componentes, la parte bio porque era un ribosoma, que es parte de la vida, la parte crio porque hay un estrés de frío para que se dé la cristalización. Y hay una anécdota atrás de esta inspiración para la técnica y tuvo que ver con unos estudios sobre el metabolismo celular de los osos polares durante la hibernación. En una lectura que fue muy al azar, en condiciones que, bueno, ya en algún momento les pueda compartir, que ella dijo: podemos cristalizar en frío a los ribosomas. Claro que no quiso trabajar con los osos polares y decidió que era mejor trabajar con las bacterias para que no se pusieran en peligro de extinción. Luego, estos estudios abrieron las puertas a múltiples investigaciones sobre el funcionamiento del ribosoma. A través de la búsqueda de las respuestas a sus interrogantes científicas, ha encontrado formas de comprender la resistencia microbiana desde una perspectiva química, por lo que sus descubrimientos tienen potencial impacto en combatir la resistencia a antibióticos y, por lo tanto, tener un alto impacto en los servicios de salud en los próximos 10 a 50 años. Tiene una amplia variedad de aplicaciones este descubrimiento. Otro es que se pudo avanzar en las teorías sobre el origen de la vida que habían estado estancadas por casi media década. Actualmente es la directora del Centro Kimmelman de Estructura Biomolecular del Instituto Weizmann en Israel. Sus investigaciones son múltiples, van más allá de las 200. Como ya escucharon, pertenece a varias prestigiosas academias de una amplia variedad de aplicaciones. También quisiera mencionar que es miembro del Consejo Científico Asesor del Secretario General de las Naciones Unidas, UNESCO, donde otros premios Nobel también son asesores. Finalmente, debo mencionar que tiene una hija, su nombre es Hagit, y una nieta, su nombre es Noah, que hoy cumple 20 años. Feliz cumpleaños a Noah. Y hoy nos acompaña su hermana Nurit Raviv, que ha sido un placer compartir con ella. Bien, muchas gracias por la visita. Y para cerrar, entre las palabras que podrían representar la vida de la doctora Jonat están curiosidad, pasión por la ciencia y amor por la familia. Felicitaciones, Ada.
Muchas gracias, maestra Ni. Acto seguido, el rector de la universidad, licenciado Roberto Moreno, procederá a la entrega del diploma del distintivo de doctor honoris causa y a la investidura de la doctora Jonat, con la ayuda de la licenciada Rosales y el doctor Adrián Gil, decano de la Facultad de Ciencias y Humanidades. El diploma que se entrega dice así: la Universidad del Valle de Guatemala, por cuanto tiene el deber de otorgar honores y distinciones a personas que se han destacado por su contribución al avance de la educación, de las ciencias y de las humanidades, así como por coadyuvar al progreso de la humanidad mediante acciones relevantes. Por tanto, acuerda otorgar a la doctora Ada Jonat el grado de doctor honoris causa en ciencias, dado en la ciudad de Guatemala a los 22 días del mes de febrero de 2016. Licenciado Roberto Moreno, rector. Licenciada Victoria Eugenia Rosales, secretaria general. En este momento invito a la doctora Jonah a dictar la conferencia Combating Antibiotic Resistance.
Until everything will be ready for the lecture, I want to say some personal words. First, thank you very, very much for inviting me and for giving me this honor. I got lots of honors, but never a red hat. Also, this hat was, I don't know if this, but a hat like this was tried on me 2 days ago and it was perfect. But now, my head became smaller. This happens only in Guatemala. Anyway, I like this country very much, and now I also like the science in this country, and of course the people. And I was asked to talk something about my studies because this is the reason I'm here, so I'll try. Sorry, it's not in Spanish. But antibiotic resistance is now a very big problem in medicine, and we are trying to look into it, and the lecture will be about it, but I want to start focusing on what brought me to this. I want to start with quoting Einstein. I hope you heard his name. He said, "I have no special talent. I am only passionately curious." And I'm similar to him. He's, of course, a giant, but in my case, curiosity and passion brought me to where I am now. But I was also enjoying the work. So as a young scientist, I was fascinated by the fundamental life process, translation of the genetic instructions that are written in a language of only 4 letters. I'm still fascinated about it. Only 4 letters, this is the language of life, everywhere. So I think that nature is more than clever. So every 4 letters are that the genetic code made of 4 letters is the basis for building the proteins that are the cell workers. This really interested me. Maybe you are not aware of all these numbers. There are 25,000 different types of proteins in a human adult body. 25,000 different ones. And there are 100,000 billion cells in a human body. And they contain 1 billion protein molecules. So the numbers are in billions. And these proteins are produced constantly because proteins don't live long. Within a few days, they are extinguished by the cells, and new ones take their place according to the needs of the cells. But the cells don't let protein to stay long inside them because they may be damaged, and then there will be a problem. So they get rid of them earlier. I want to introduce a concept in nature. Structure means function, or function means structure. And this very complicated machine is my example. So I'm sure you know this machine, this mechanism. They are these paper clips. They are holding together a few pages of paper. But when nervous people are playing with them, they don't do anything. They don't boil them, they don't cut them, they don't wet them, they don't cool them, nothing. It just changed the structure to this or to this. These are not functional anymore. And that's a rule of science. It's not enough to have the right composition, the right material. It has to be the right structure or the right fold. Proteins are long chains made of amino acids, and there are 20 types of them. And the fold of each protein, which is carefully designed for fulfilling its function, is determined by the sequence of the amino acids that is building it. This was found when I was still a student. These 20 types of amino acids that have the sequence that enable the function, this sequence, what determines it? The gene that is coding for this protein. So each protein has a gene, and each gene is coding for a protein, and the sequence within the gene is determining the sequence within the protein. So the DNA, where the genes are, is actually a string of instructions. It's nothing else than this. It's like instructions in a book, in an instruction book, maybe in a cooking book or in a factory, written in 4 letters language and translating into 20 letters proteins. So maybe I'll tell you a little anecdote now. I'm talking many times to very young children, 6, 7, 8 years old. And I ask them, what is DNA? Do you know what is DNA? I'm asking it because when I was 7 years old, DNA was not discovered. But now they tell me, of course we know. DNA is the tool that the police is using to identify criminals. That's the way they think. And they think about the proteins that are unique. There are proteins like this. And we can see it even when we look at ourselves, curly hair, white hair, brown hair, blonde, and so on. But there are also proteins that are the same in the whole species, in the whole organism. We are breathing the same way, we are digesting our food the same way. So DNA is not only for the police, it's also for our life. So this is DNA, and here are the 4 languages, the 4 letters in the language. I drew them in different colors, so 1, orange, and blue, and yellow, and violet. That's it, the 4. And they are making bases like in a ladder. And that's it. Now, each 3 of them are coding for 1 amino acid. So it can be 1, 2, 3, or 1, 2, 3, and so on. But actually, when they are within the DNA with the double helical structure, they are not available. They are hidden in the structure. So in life, first of all, the DNA is being transcribed to a molecule which is very similar, called RNA, that also has 4 letters, that 3 of the letters are exactly the same, and 1 is a little different, but chemically this difference is not important. And the real difference between RNA and DNA is that RNA can exist as a single chain. It doesn't have to be double helical. This particular RNA, this piece that is transcribed from the DNA, is called messenger RNA. It brings the message to the cellular machinery to make proteins. So here is a growing protein. And it is made, it is translated from the messenger RNA by an apparatus, a cellular machinery called the ribosome. And this is what I wanted to understand, how this is happening. Now I understand much more than I wanted, but this was the motivation. So now that we understand what ribosomes do, we like to describe them as a factory, each of them as a factory, universal factories. They work the same way. It means the decoding and the production of the protein is the same way. So here is the factory. It has 2 floors. The messenger with the instruction come in and being read here, decoded here. And for each triplet, an amino acid that is cognate to it is brought by tracks. It's a factory. The tracks are also molecules called tRNA, and they are very, very similar, but somewhat different. And they can decode the code by making the same type of pairs like in DNA. So this is the way that the decoding happens within our factory at the top floor. So when a triplet that is being decoded comes here, the tRNA that has the cognate amino acid will come in. The amino acid, after the decoding happens, it will be connected to the growing protein and will come out from the lower floor, and also the empty tRNAs, the empty tracks. And the whole process is not very expensive in energy. It costs only very little. I don't want to go into details, but I drew it as a chimney. So actually what happens here, triplet will be found here, and this amino acid will be connected to the newly grown protein inside the ribosome, inside the factory. I don't know to draw inside, so I drew outside. So what I said until now, maybe we jump this. I just want to show you that this is the track. That's the way it looks, tRNA. Here are the triplet that is being decoded, and here at the end of it, it carries the amino acid. It's all double helical structure, only the lower part and the loop here. The lower part is fully conserved throughout evolution. It's the same in bacteria, in cockroaches, in apples, in human, always the same. For the scientists here, CCA, amino acid. So instead of talking and telling, we made a little movie, a little clip, already 14 years ago when we got the structures. And the movie is available on YouTube. It shows bacterial ribosomes. And 14 years and many hits, nobody complained, which I think this shows that the movie at least is close to what we think is reality. I made a movie when I took all the structures that were known at that time, and there were a few of them, each of them captured at a different functional state, and I interpolated between them. Therefore, you will see a structure, but also a lot of dynamics. And we did it together with two artists, 2 students of art from the Art Academy in Jerusalem. And they were the ones that made the action movie. And they decided that messenger RNA has to come to the ribosome. So it's okay. And also they decided the cells have to be green. It's also okay. So what you will see here is what we think is okay also scientifically. So here messenger is coming to the small subunit. And look, it takes it. Look here. Choop, did you say it took it? Now messenger is sitting in its path, and this is all monitors by initiation factor number 3. Initiation factors are those that tell the ribosome now start, and start correctly, also monitor that it's correct. So now messenger is bound, everything is fine. The large subunit, the first tRNA, the first track can come. It is coming with another initiation factor, number 2, and then when everything is ready, the large subunit can come, associate with the small one by complementarity of their surfaces, and also make bridges by conformational changes, chemical conformational changes. So this is the way the ribosome is created. Now we are looking at the whole ribosome from the outside, from the solvent. So tRNAs are being brought in by elongation factors according to the messenger instructions. The messenger is here. The decoding is happening here, and you see the ribosome helps. One hand gets it in, and the other hand gets it out. Now we took away the large subunit, so you don't see the hands anymore. Just see how the bond is being made between the new amino acid and the growing protein. It is done very far from where the decoding is. So you see now the whole ribosome again. You could see earlier that the protein goes into a tunnel. Through the tunnel it goes out. And when it comes out, and it's long enough to come out, it folds. Should fold correctly, the cell may help. When there is a stop codon, when it says the protein is made, there are factors, recycling factor and release factors that come into the ribosome instead of the tRNAs and separate the two parts. And protein now can go out, fold and go to where it was. It's needed. The tRNAs and the messenger and the two parts of the ribosomes are ready for the next job. That's the whole thing, ladies and gentlemen. So simple, but so intricate and so sophisticated. And it took only 20 years minus 2 weeks to get this result. So I just want to tell you that the ribosome is not made of something fuzzy as you saw before, which was easier to show. We know its composition. It's 250,000 atoms in bacteria, and most of bacteria are almost the same. It's made of ribosomal RNA, 1,600 nucleotides for the chemists. This is the gray. And up to 21 different proteins. Each protein is shown in a different color. The colors have no meaning except for showing you that they are different proteins. Sediments is 30S. To remind you, it is where the decoding happens. And its molecular weight, for those that are interested, almost 1 million, 0.85. The large subunit is 1.5 million in molecular weight. Its sediments is 50S in bacteria. 3,000 bases, nucleotides, and up to 34 different proteins. Let me remind you that here is where the bonds are being made, and the elongation of the chain is happening. It means the ribosome is a polymerase, not just making bonds, polymerase. So ribosomes are universal. What do I mean? They function the same way in all cells, from bacteria to elephant. But main function, the decoding and the production of the newly born chain. They have other regulatory functions that evolved with evolution, and I won't talk about them now. I'm just talking about the basic structure, the basic functions. There is a huge number of ribosomes that function in each living cell. Earlier we talked about huge number of proteins. But ribosomes, which are the largest cellular particles, are usually hundreds of thousands in each cell, but in specific cells, in liver, they may reach 5 million in one cell. It's just incredible. Even in bacteria, when bacteria grows, they reach 100,000. organisms that are a single cell. They act continuously. They can form up to 40 bonds. Peptide bonds are the bonds that connect the amino acids in 1 second. Between 5 to 40, depending on the complexity of the system. And they hardly make mistake. 1 to a million. Or at least this is the mistake that we can observe. Maybe they make more, but they repair it themselves or reject it themselves because they have a very good proofreading machinery. I was a good student, really good and also fast. So I was asked to make 1 peptide bond, a single peptide bond in my second year in the university. At that time it was an exercise. It took me 6 hours for 1. And look at the ribosomes. I can make up to 40 in a second. You see how clever they are? Okay, let's talk about something else. I'm sure you know all these guys, or most of them. Mozart, Chopin, Kafka, Orwell. What is common to all of them? They are all artists or intellectuals, giants. And if you look at their lifespan, they all died very young, very, very young. The oldest was 47. They all died before or in the middle of last century. This is 1950, and all before this, much before. What you cannot see in the slide is that they all died from infectious diseases. Most of them are not fatal in our days. Most of them are considered simple, like pneumonia, bad stomach, or something like this. What happened in the middle of last century? The middle of last century, it's more or less the time where antibiotics came into use in hospitals. And then life expectancy went up, or at least infectious diseases became less of killers. So because of the fundamental role played by the ribosomes, many antibiotics target them. It means if one wants to get rid of bad bacteria, hamper the ribosome or paralyze it. So within a few generations, a day or 2 or 3, the bacteria will die because the proteins will be either not made or made with mistakes and so on, depending what the antibiotic does. So in fact, almost half of the clinically useful antibiotics target protein biosynthesis, most of them by paralyzing the ribosome. Just to remind you, for those that forgotten what they studied or never studied, the natural antibiotics are the weapons that bacteria from one type use to interfere with the cell life of different species. It means these are the first bullets, the first war in the microorganism world. Now the question is, how do the tiny antibiotics paralyze the giant ribosome? Ribosomes, bacterial ribosomes, have molecular weight of 2.5 million, more or less, depending on which, but they are very, very similar. And antibiotics are less than 1,000, usually 500, 600. I say they were Dalton, that's the name of the unit, but it doesn't matter. This is 1,000 and this is 2.5 million. How do they work? So if you think about a factory, in a factory, if one wants to stop a factory, it's enough to stop one step, an assembly line, one step. This is what the antibiotics do. So what you see here, I hope you see, are the skeletons of the large subunit and of the small subunit. And the balloons in them show where antibiotics bind. How they bind, I will show in a minute, but where? And if we look at it, almost all of them, maybe even all of them, bind in functional sites, either where the decoding happens, or where the bond is being made, or in the tunnel where the protein goes out, or in the hinging. They stop the hinging, the hands that you could see in the movie. So it's enough, for each of them, it's enough to stop one thing. Really clever. So again, based on the first clip and the first movie, we have a second one. This was seen even by more people than that. We have more hits. But again, nobody complains. And we look at here is how antibiotics target bacterial ribosomes. So you can see it at home too, if you like. It's in Google, in YouTube, sorry. So you will see here 4 examples. 2 examples of antibiotics that target the small subunit and 2 the large subunit. And please remember, I only wanted to understand how the ribosome works. Here comes an antibiotic called Edein, not very useful because it's toxic, but you don't have to be big to stop the messenger. Just a barrier. That's it. Second one is occupying the position, it's tetracycline, and it's occupying the position of the second tRNA. So one tRNA is not enough to make a protein. The second cannot associate with the ribosome. So that's it. The third one that you will see, it's called erythromycin, and this is the first one of ribosomal antibiotics that went into clinical use. It sits in the tunnel. You see, very little protein is being made and cannot pass, blocking the tunnel. The tunnel is very, very narrow, exactly what's needed for a protein to pass. So sitting here is blocking it. And the last one is chemically the most clever. It goes into the bond. Here you remember the bond will be made here. And look, clindamycin, choop. Just in the bond. Isn't it clever? So cleverness of nature is something that we should appreciate a lot. So I say that all ribosomal, showed you that all ribosomal antibiotics bind to ribosomal functional sites. But I also said earlier that all ribosomal functional sites are highly conserved. They perform translation in the same way. And mandatory for clinical use, I know there are some doctors here and they know it better than me, is the distinction between the patient and the pathogen. We don't want to kill the patient. We don't want to kill first the pathogen and then to kill a healthy patient. We don't want to do anything wrong to the patient. So how does this work? And I'll show you one example that is based on a subtle difference. So here is, you remember erythromycin? What you see here is the whole large subunit looking from top. This is the tunnel, and erythromycin blocks most of it. How does it block? If we look at this figure, what actually I show here, imagine that the tunnel direction is this one, and we cut it perpendicular. Of course, the tunnel is not rectangular. It has a shape. So this is the shape. All RNA in this position, all made of ribosomal RNA. This is the tunnel, and you see that it's blocked by all these colorful things. Each of them is representing one antibiotic that is a daughter or granddaughter of erythromycin. They are all called macrolides, and for the chemists, the chemical formula is here. So all block, all these colors. Each color represents one of them. I don't want to go into detail, but you see that they block beautifully or very good or just good, but they block. All interact with one of the tunnel wall components, which is called A in position 2058. A is adenine. Now, I want to show you, ladies and gentlemen, the difference between us and bacteria, or the opposite. So this is A in position 2058, it's adenine. Erythromycin binds here, and the contact here, the affinity here is very, very high. Fantastic. Now, pay attention to this point. This will show you the difference between bacteria and us. Here, this point, that's all. That's bacteria and that's us. G instead of A. And when there is a G here, the distance to the erythromycin is too small, and there is rejection and no binding. That's all. That's right. Just wonderful, isn't it? But that's it. Too short, too small, no binding. So let's talk about a problem, the biggest problem, one of the biggest problems in antibiotic treatment today, and currently, resistance to antibiotics. This is one of the most severe problems in modern medicine, and we try to understand, first of all, how does it happen? What are the mechanisms that allow the bacteria to develop resistance? So a permanent mechanism is to modify the anchors of the subtle differences that facilitate clinical use. It means the bacteria change itself, modify its own genome. So if you remember, this was the basis for selectivity: A, binding; G, rejection. This is what the bacteria does. It changes itself from A to G, like that. And then there is no binding. So simple. They can allow themselves to mutate themselves many, many times a day, and this mutation that survives, this is the resistance strain. So can we combat resistance to antibiotics? Here I am rather negative. In my opinion, this is unlikely, because bacteria, in street words, want to live. As I said a minute ago, they can mutate themselves until they find a mutant that works. So I'm not sure that we can combat it completely, but maybe we can control it or make resistance slower. So I will show you an example. Synergism of two compounds that make one antibiotic. Two drugs that enhance each other, interact with each other and enhance it. So you see now the whole large subunit rotating, and inside there we put 3 colors that show the position of 3 different antibiotics in pink, in yellow, and in red. Pink and yellow are in the active site, and red is already in the tunnel, and you see how close they are. So based on this, a bacteria that doesn't know the structure of ribosome, and none of our studies, produced an antibiotic that is made of 2 compounds. And when I saw it, I was really excited. So these are the walls of the tunnel near the active site. This is one component, and this is the second. Don't you think that this is the winning couple? There are many anchors, and one is blocking the other from going out. Just fantastic. So when I heard about it, this is what happened to me. And as a chemist, I thought, let's combine the 2 of them. So luckily, I thought so, but somebody else did it, some companies. They tried to combine them, but they could not. They found out that the combined material or compound is too large, but they didn't really look into it very carefully. So we did it, irrespective of everything, because we wanted to understand the structural basis. So we look now at the active site. This is the ribosome in khaki. And here, the bond will be made. Here is the newly protein will go to the tunnel. And in the active site, there is more or less symmetry of 2 sites, but two bases, 2 letters that bulge. And I want you to pay attention to this one. Oops, sorry. Don't know what happened here. To this one. This. From top, it sits here. Now there are the 2 sides. This is the ribosome, the gray, and the bond would be made here. And it is very flexible. It's very needed for making the bonds and very flexible. Here comes compound A of the first medicine that was made. It sits here. And because it sits here, and this base is very flexible, it kicks it out. So now not only it binds, it also changes the active site. It destroys the active site. So life is very strong, and the ribosome kicks out compound 1, and the base comes back to its place. But there is always surplus of antibiotics, and compound 1 comes again, and base is out again. But now comes also compound 2. Sits here. You see? It doesn't let this to go out. It doesn't let this to go in. It's fantastic. They are really enhancing each other. This is what we understood, although making one compound of them did not work. And also because this particular antibiotic is rather toxic, it's called Cinercin. It's toxic to the liver, and it's also expensive. So what we thought, that although all the bad things about it, the toxicity and the price, owing to the great clinical potential that we can stop block the binding site, we decided to look for other possibilities, other couples, other pairs. So if we look at this is Cinercin, the one I just described, 2 big pairs. We found in the literature that a bug called S. roshi also has instructions for 2 components. And it was first found in Sri Lanka. So this is called lancacidin, and this is called lancamycin, and we call it lanka. And we are trying now to, it's not a very good antibiotic now, it's not very strong, so we are trying to make it stronger in our lab. You know why we have to do it? Because the companies, they don't like to make antibiotics. It's not profitable enough. So we have some modest contribution. I just showed you one. And we don't think that we are going to combat, but maybe to control resistance. And one of them is based on the fact that until now, all the structures of ribosomes determined by us or anywhere else are of pathogen models. Pathogens are the disease-bringing bacteria. Until now, there was no work on them, or hardly any. So we know now the common modes, but not the species specificity. Each pathogen is specific. So therefore, we decided to work on pathogens. But I want to say one more word before we go on, as pathogens versus the microbiome. The microbiome, the trillions of bacteria that live in our body, in the gut flora, in the ears, in the nose, they are good. Most of them are really good and important. We come back to it. So when we treat, but they are very similar to the pathogens. So when we treat a pathogen for pneumonia, we also change the gut flora, the microbiome, in a way that we don't even understand. We kill some of them. We eliminate some of them. And afterwards, where there is a recovery, not always it was as before. It's a new study, a new topic, 2-3 years old, and it's very, very important. So what is the microbiome? It's trillions of eubacteria. We don't even know how many, not only we don't, the microbiologists don't. The collectively known as microbiome, it's not only the gut flora, it's the body. And they are important. It's intriguing because some of them are directly connected to diseases like obesity, diabetics, autoimmune diseases, and so on. So changing the gut flora is taking a risk, which is not always good, just because we have an infectious disease. So therefore, we crystallized a pathogen, one bacteria. It was not so easy, but here you can see the crystals, and we looked. And here, it's more for the chemists. We look at the pathogen in blue and the model in gray. In this particular place, there is 100% identity. And you can see the identity here. You can distinguish between the model and the pathogen. But here, there are changes. 100% identity, and there are changes. And we specifically put here a compound just that you see that one can bind things here. Why are there changes? Because in the next shell, there is here a base that can stack to this one, but it does not exist in the pathogen. So this is stuck to this base and opens this base pair that is here, creates another one. So I don't want to go into more detail, but you can see that even when a pocket is made full identity, it can be changed. It's very important for those that want to calculate. So based on these tiny but very meaningful differences in the architectures of antibiotic binding pockets, we expect to design anti-resistant specimens. But I want to go to one more point, and this is environmental and ecological considerations. All the antibiotics known now, at least all the ribosome antibiotics known now, are built of a core and some additions. All these cores are non-digestible. We can't digest them. And also the microbiome can't digest them. So when we take antibiotics, they go out to the sewage together with everything else we send there. And they are contaminating. They are small, they stay in the ground, and they become the food of cattle. So we think about designing antibiotics that are digestible, that can be degradable. So here, look again on the pathogens in blue and the model. There are here 9 additional bases. If you look just at the sequence, 9 out of 4,500, who cares? Nobody thinks it's important. But if you look at the structure, look here, the structures are the same, identical. But here, the blue is longer than this. And when one looks at it, this can be a target for designing an antibiotic that it doesn't have this core in the middle, that can be elongated, can be sugar, can be DNA, can be PNA. So we identified 25 new potential sites like this, and 16 of them were found to inhibit ribosome function. And I want to show you where they are. So here, the large subunit from 2 views. You see the blue pieces are the additional regions in the pathogen. Pathogen is Staph aureus, and these regions, most of them are not directly related to ribosome function, but related to ribosome interactions. So interactions with between large and small subunit, or between the ribosome and the factors, the elongation factors and so on. So blocking them paralyze the ribosome. And that's what we are doing now. The last thing that we are doing, we had previous results that they were correct, but I didn't have the guts, the courage to think about them, but now I do. So here you can see tetracycline bound to the small subunit. It is bound in 6 positions. And for the chemist, here is the chemistry of these positions. But the binding is not full. The binding is full only in here and here, where the stars are. The rest is good binding, but not full binding, like 50% or so. This one and this one, the red, are in positions that are functional, decoding and motion. But those are far away, and the bug didn't even think about making resistance to them. So we think that by chemistry, we can extend them so they reach important positions, functionally important, like going with me, like that. And we hope that in this way we can create new antibiotics. I didn't want to talk about it. I was hesitating, although it was published, because nobody talked about multi-site. But recently, a year and a half ago, a paper came out, not from our lab, about negamycin, and it binds in all these places. Only this one is directly in an active site. So now multi-binding is acceptable and we want to use it. So with this, I more or less finished what I wanted to tell you, although I have a lot of more. But I want to, because I was asked so many times today about how this project went, I want to say a few words about it. How did we start? As I said, when we started, it was known that ribosome translates the genetic code. But in beginning of 1980, and really beginning in January, I said I want to understand the structural basis for ribosome function. Everybody laughed at me. They were nice. They said it in a nice way. You must be kidding. All what can be learned about ribosomes is already known. And when I said I want to understand the interior, they told me they are black box. And I became the target of jokes. There were lots of jokes about me. The dreamer, the fantasionaire, the one that doesn't understand. I don't want to repeat all, but you understand what I'm saying. For determining the structure and understanding crystallography is needed, and I don't think I have to explain here. How does crystallography work? We use X-rays, Röntgen rays, that are being diffracted from any object by the chemical nature of the object according to mathematical rules. The object, the materials node is mathematics, transform Fourier. So please look at it, ignore the red and the pink and the gray, just the beam and this position where crystals is. You don't see the crystal, but think about the crystal here, and all this diffraction that goes to all directions and with all lengths. Length is here showing intensity. So what happens? We have crystals, we shine X-rays through them, we get diffraction. We get diffraction like this in all 360 degrees around the crystal. This is only one of them. We have all these spots. The spots are what we saw earlier, the arrows that came out of the crystal. And the further they are from the center, the more detailed they are, the higher resolution. Now we take all the diffractions, all the sphere around the crystal, and connect them together, merge them together by computers. The better the computers, the better it's done, but not enough. We need to know how to do it, and for this we need crystallographers. And you see this little thing? This is the crystallography, it's me. So after we collect all those together, we get maps like topographical maps that have mountains. And if we look at it in the mountains, we can see where mountains are, and we know this is where are the atoms, because what we see is electrons. So this is the interpretation of these mountains. This mountain of electrons is probably of a much higher density atom, like a metal. But this is the idea. We can do it also to RNA in ribosomes or to proteins. But crystals, we need crystals. This is the beginning for crystallography. Some materials like to crystallize, like salt, sodium chloride. They really like to make entities that are fully periodical. This direction, in this direction, and in this direction. They make it themselves spontaneously in nature. Sugar can also be made, and even proteins. So this protein, lysozyme, was first crystallized in Oxford in the 60s, but could be repeated by a sixth grader, a kid, school kid. But now we know, these are just the large subunit of ribosomes. At that time, their structure was not known, but now we know. Telling all of them to stand like this, one next to the other, and also in the third dimension that I don't show here, it was considered not only big question mark, but impossible. Why? Because many, maybe not many, but some groups, some very, very good scientists and their students and their collaborators tried to crystallize ribosomes and failed. And then ribosomes became considered non-crystallizable because they said high degree of internal mobility. Now they know, they were right. Considerable flexibility, correct. Functional heterogeneity, it means many structures, correct. Chemical complexity, correct. Large size, asymmetric nature, correct. But what they paid less attention to was the marked tendency to deteriorate. So when one produces ribosomes, even the best production is usually only half active. What happened to the other half? What happened? Every ribosomologist knew it. And I thought the other half is deteriorated, is damaged, and therefore they don't crystallize. Okay, so why did I have the decision, why did I make the decision to crystallize after all these big scientific giants failed, and I was just a very, very young starter? Because I read about the polar bears, I read about the delegation that went to see what happens to their life while they are sleeping in the winter. You know that polar bears are sleeping in the winter, 4 or 5 months. And what did they find? They find that the ribosomes are orderly packed in the inner side of their cell membranes, which shows that ribosomes can be orderly packed. People couldn't do it, but every bear, every cell, every winter, it's possible. So why does it happen? I thought that this was because the bears, or nature, provides bears a mechanism to keep the ribosomes untouched during the winter. So when they are densely packed, they are not deteriorated. And when the bears get up and they want to do everything that bears are doing when they are not asleep, they can produce the proteins needed. So my conclusion was that stress induces periodic packing of ribosomal particles. This is what I thought, and this was actually the solution. Please don't read all of it, just see the resources that we used for ribosomes. Dead Sea bacteria, hot springs, waste of nuclear power. So I want to show you the Dead Sea from top. This is an aerial. The Dead Sea is the lowest part in the world, and it's in Israel. No life, you see, when you get closer, no life. These are salt structures that came out of the evaporating sea. But even in these salt structures, in the salt, there is a bacteria. Here is a colony, some colonies of it. There are actually 2 bacteria. Heloarcula marismorti. I think that marismorti is clear to you. Dead Sea. Helo is salt, and Arcula is the name of the family of the bacteria. You see it here, the pinky? You see it here? So using these ribosomes was difficult to make it, but using these ribosomes was one of the ways we went, and also those that came from sewages of atomic piles. These bacteria, it's called Radiodurans, Deinococcus radiodurans, can live under any condition, any extreme condition, very hot, very cold, any environment, dust, hunger, whatever. So after a lot of trials, 25,000, but as I yesterday explained, this was not a lot of time and not a lot of work. It was done almost automatically. We got microcrystals that were not good for crystallography, but had the information that they may become good if they grow larger and more ordered. And after 6 years, we had, look at what a nice collection of crystals. Actually, we had many more. These are only 6. We had 25 types of crystals from something that was known not to crystallize. So then we went to measure them, and the measurements are made in accelerators. This is the accelerator, the synchrotron in Grenoble. You see how beautiful it is from top? And the whole city is so beautiful. It's green, and there is snow here. Everything fantastic until you get to it, but more I want to explain what happens. So here the particles, oh God, something happened to. Here the particles are being accelerated. They run around this big circle that you saw earlier, the roof of it. And in the tangential, there are stations where we can measure. Not only we, many types of measurements. So this is what we did, and we got beautiful diffraction. So as you remember, we started in 1980, and this is 1986. Look how beautiful. And to the edge, fantastic. You had to see the group, mainly the students. They were jumping. Yes, not for long. Not for long, for less than a minute. Next one was already damaged. So the question, okay. First of all, I want to tell you we repeated it more than 100 times. In about 6 or 7 different synchrotrons, we always got only one picture. So how did we feel then? We felt like we climbed the Everest. We came from here, and making the crystals was climbing the Everest. We thought that this is the Everest. We couldn't see anything there. So we climbed and climbed and climbed and climbed for 6 years until we reached the summit. And then we discovered that the real Everest is far away, and it's maybe even more difficult to get there. So this was time that I could think about stopping this project, but instead I thought, why does it happen? And I thought maybe we can fight with it. Why ribosomal crystals are readily damaged by X-rays? Every tissue, every living tissue is damaged by X-ray, but so fast, why? And in my opinion, there is a primary reason, which is the beam, the X-ray beam cut the bonds, the chemical bonds, and then each part of the chemical bond is unhappy. One lost an electron, one got an electron, they run around to satisfy themselves, and they break more and more bonds. So what did I think? I think this part can be stopped or minimized by not supplying energy, cooling the crystals while the data is collected, crystallographic data, to around minus 200 degrees centigrade. And it worked. Here is the experiment. In 1986, together with Hakon Hopp from Davis and me. The experiment was done in Stanford. Those that can see my face can see that I really didn't believe it will work. And even our friend, Ron Levy, that is a doctor there, came and made fun of me. But it worked. Sorry. I don't know what happened here. Yeah, it worked. Look how nice. And it helped the whole world. It became routine with no time. This was the end of 86. In 87 it started. There were, at that time, less than 100 structures. This is the number of structures in the protein data bank. And this is the year. And in year 2011, there were already 57,000 structures, all determined at cryotemperature, at minus 200, 180, by different groups. And all of them of very important compounds, medically or for materials from crystals that otherwise will not be useful. So even if we didn't have the structure, we had this. I want just to give some credits. The Weizmann Institute that let me work, although I was a dream. The whole thing started, the whole study started with a very strong collaboration with Max Planck in Berlin. This is the head, Professor Wittmann, that wanted to understand everything about ribosomes, and was very important when we showed the first diffraction to start a group for us in the synchrotron in Hamburg. So I had my own group there and my own group in Israel in parallel. Unfortunately, he died 10 years before the structures came, and he was replaced first by Franceschi and then by Fucini. But what I want to do now is to thank my research groups, the two research groups, for their devotion and determination in good and in bad times for many years. So I want to show you the group in Hamburg. It was closed 14 years ago. It always had angels, the technical assistants, because they said nobody can work on ribosomes without being an angel. And they came to the Dead Sea to look for better bacteria. What you can see here that they had a real good time. So this group does not exist anymore, but this group does, and this is the group in Israel. And here, a few words to the female here, to the young female. So many times I was asked in the last 3 days about female in science. I want to show you that it's possible to be very good scientist, excellent scientist, and also excellent housewife or mother. Anat is the senior scientist in ribosome group in Israel. She has 3 children, and she's a fantastic scientist. Ella, only 2 children, but still, she's a very good scientist, a very good housewife. Raz, he has also 3 children, and he traced all the RNA, but he's a man, so let's not talk about him. Let's talk about Tamar. Tamar came 16 years ago for 10 weeks, and she's still around. The day that I took the picture, she had a birthday. So I will skip all these guys, just showed you what she baked for her birthday. You see a cake here? Maybe you don't see it clear enough. So here is the cake. And this shows that she knows to bake, and also that in my group, ribosomes are considered sweet. I also want to thank my family, my daughter, my granddaughter, my mother, my sister, all the family. You can see here my daughter. She's an MD, and my granddaughter at school. She said, when I got a For Women in Life L'Oreal Prize in Paris, she said, she wrote a speech, and I didn't know about it. My name is Noah, Ada's granddaughter. As you know, she is a very busy scientist, but she always finds time for me. Oh, you see, she wrote it herself. She even gave me a prize. This is not her prize, this is the Nobel medal. But for me, her prize, the Grandma of the Year, is as important as the prize. The Grandma of the Year is Ada Yonat. So. One more minute. So I asked her, which year? Every prize has a year. Which year? You know what she said? I have to reprove myself every year. She will take it off the wall if I fail. So, first of all, that's the only prize I can fail. Every other prize cannot be taken from me. She's the only one. And second, I want to show you, it's already 10 years before the Nobel, and it's still on the wall. So I'm still her beloved grandma. Today, she's 20. And I want to show you that ribosomes became popular. So here is me. It's a carnival. He's me, and she's a ribosome. You see the protein grows from her? And also young children. And this is what happened to me. By an artist who is not a crystallographer, not a chemist, but he got the message. Small subunit, large subunit, and he told me he took it out from the internet. Thank you.